I turned one of the biggest game franchises of the decade into a manga. With the recent launch of Monster Hunter Wilds, it's safe to say that many people are new to the games, including myself, and I wanted to create a one-shot in relation to some themes in the games. This story is entirely spoiler-free and can be understood by anyone, even if you haven't played the games, so don't worry too much about that. Anyways, let's get straight into the creative process and show exactly how this manga came to be. For starters, I needed a plan, so I map out the first page's layout. In the game Monster Hunter, you play as a hunter, a person that has the ability and requirement to hunt down monsters that are a threat to the world and or environments around you. You also have a companion that resembles a humanoid cat thing, which is known as a palico. Palicos are basically your right-hand man and are there to assist you throughout your battles, so I wanted to create a scene where a hunter is fighting a really tough boss alongside his palico. But things take a turn for the worst, and they struggle to handle its strength. Or do they? Anyways, that's all I'm going to say for now. Let's get more in depth into what I'm working on. So with this first page, I wanted to have a shot of the main character sleeping in a field of grass. He was calm and at ease, but clearly something wasn't right. He wasn't actually sleeping in a field of grass, but was instead daydreaming, as he had been hit pretty hard from the monster he was fighting. To capture what I wanted in this scene, I drew in his head and made sure that he looked like he was out cold. I also wanted to point out that I tried things differently this time around, so instead of building up this entire panel in one sitting, I was going to do a rough sketch with shading and details prior to giving it like a clean line art layer over top of it. I really wanted to see how much I could speed up the process whilst also keeping quality, and I started to like the sketchy look a lot. Nonetheless, I did end up eventually going over all of it later, but I still really like how it looked prior to doing that, so you guys let me know what you think. After capturing the look I wanted for these first two panels, I then moved on to the part where the hunter wakes up. His palico was shouting his name, and eventually it got him to snap out of being knocked out. Drawing a palico was definitely a challenge for me because I am not very keen on drawing animals, let alone humanoid ones, but I think after a bit of trial and error, I achieved the look I was going for, and continued moving forward with the details. I added in his large whiskers, wide mouth, and placed a big old knight's helmet on his head. I then added in his large sword on the left of the page to show that he was trying to fend off the monster as he shouted for the hunter to wake up. Once the palico panel was done, I moved on to the last panel of the first page, which was a shot of the hunter in his armor, waking up and processing what is going on. He took a pretty hard hit and his eye was damaged in the process, along with his glasses being cracked. I continued with adding in his hair, armor pieces, helmets, and I'm super happy with the expression I captured. I think this panel is one of my favorites, not because it's super detailed or special, but because it turned out exactly as I imagined it looked in my head. I then reinforced the panels with a nicer layer of line art and darkened the necessary areas with a darker brush. I was super pleased with how the first page turned out, so I moved right away onto the next one. This page was going to be extremely detailed as it was one huge panel page with the reveal of the monster moving towards the hunter and his palico. I knew I wanted to show the difference in size as much as I could by placing the two main characters in the bottom right corner whilst the monster approaches and takes up the rest of the page. So I kind of began with a rough sketch, placing my ideas down so I don't forget them. The rough sketch of the two characters includes a shot of the armor they're wearing, along with how small the palico is compared to the hunter. Then after sketching them in, I began with the sketch of the monster, also known in the games as Arkveld. Arkveld is a giant dragon with large claws and huge wings that are covered in rocks and debris. Arkveld also has these giant chain pieces that form out from its body in order to rapidly swing towards its enemies. I honestly thought this monster's design was one of my favorites, and it was super cool. After completing the sketch for Arkveld, I then moved on to refining the page and adding in the necessary details. I spent so long making sure the line art for this scene looked really clean and awesome, just so that you could fully see how large and intricate this monster really is. I did really like the idea of keeping the sketch layer visible though, because it kind of adds texture and extra contrast to the line art. To differentiate the characters and the monster, I added a dark gradient over top the entire thing and erased the section that was on top of the characters, so that they're completely white and stand out against the harsh darkness of Arkveld. I then made sure to add things like speed lines to show the situation is intense, and then finished off with a page with a dark background since I wanted the main focus to be on the monster itself and didn't really want to leave any distractions on the page. If you're interested in seeing the full drawing process unedited, it's going to be down in the description below on a second channel I made just for that. Honestly, it's a really good way to have something running in the background while you're drawing to give you a bit of inspiration, or just to have something in the background while you're doing something else. Anyways, the third page of this manga begins with a shot of the hunter yelling for his palico to fall back since he feels like this battle won't end well and doesn't want his palico to die alongside him. He's basically telling the palico to fall back and to try and call for help using a flare, since he would definitely need backup if they could arrive in time. The next panel was a shot of the palico confidently staying around and planning something mischievous he had in mind to help. The third panel was the hunter pressing forward with his greatsword, once again reiterating that he should run before things get too dangerous. I honestly really loved how this panel turned out since I was able to capture the movement and idea really well. I also really loved how detailed yet simple I was able to make the expression on the hunter's face without it taking away from the rest of the scene. For this page, my brain was more focused on putting down what I had in mind on paper before getting busy worrying about the smaller details. I did find this process a lot more enjoyable though, since I was able to properly follow along with the story without needing to refine one section in particular for a long period of time. I then moved on to the 4th and 5th panels of the page. Both include the hunter blocking attacks from Arkfeld as he struggles to take it down. He can't really seem to find any openings and is basically just guarding as long as he can. The 4th panel is a shot of Arkfeld slamming his chains down towards the hunter as he prepares for impact, and the 5th panel is the hunter fighting to keep it together as Arkfeld continues attacking him. I genuinely love how this page looks. There's something about the fluidity and the movement that I placed in the panels that makes it so enjoyable to look at least in my opinion. I then decided to move on to the next page since I was really in a flow state when it came to creativity and didn't want to stop myself from rendering any smaller details, since in reality I could always just go back and do that later. The 4th page was interesting. I started drawing what I had in mind for the first panel, but quickly decided that I wanted that scene to be the second panel and not the first. I tried my best to want and keep consistency as much as I could, and the flow of the panels just didn't work as I wanted, having that be the first panel. So I moved it down and then worked on it as intended. I wanted a scene of the hunter shouting with all of his might that he probably isn't going to make it, and that he's hoping that the Palico had run away at this point. The first panel is a shot of the hunter once again holding off an attack from Arkfeld. He's starting to shake, he's realizing just how difficult this is and that things are eventually not going to go as smoothly as he had hoped for. The reality is that this could very well be his last hunt, and he wanted to make sure that he protected his Palico until the very end of this battle. The second panel was more emphasis on what he was saying, and it gives me more room to add additional text and show that he was about to turn and check to see if his Palico had ran away from the battle as he had wished for. The third panel was the look of the hunter as he turned his head to look at where he last saw his Palico. He was shocked to say the least, and didn't know what emotions to feel at this moment. Once I complete the details of this panel, I'll reveal what exactly happened, so I decided to draw in a close-up shot of his face to really capture the expression he had. I wanted him to look as shocked as I possibly could, and I think I did a pretty good job at doing that. I then made sure to include his busted up eye and broken glasses to match consistency from the previous scenes. It was clear that he was in danger and he was extremely battered and beaten and really needed help. Which moves us on to the next page, which begins with a shot of his Palico. His Palico was fully suited up in his armor and looked unbelievably locked in. He was ready to end this battle himself and was not going to run away in fear because then he would lose his hunter in the process. I began by drawing in his positioning for the stance I wanted to capture. He was fully kitted in armor, so I really needed to try and make it look as awesome and accurate as I could to also match the anatomy of a Palico. I began by placing his arm planted towards us while his hind leg is farther back. I then made sure his cape was blowing in the wind along with the hair that is attached to the backside of his helmet. I genuinely love how this scene was turning out, and I think it gives off the exact type of energy that a Palico has in the games. They're always there to support, they're sometimes there to support and really help when you need them the most. So I wanted to prove that with this manga by making the Palico the real hero of this story. I then added in the finishing details like the sword he has, the background details, the speed lines, and everything else you're going to see here. The next panel was then a shot of the Palico jolting up into the air with power surging from the ground beneath him. He was ready to jump into battle and end things once and for all. I began with a really rough sketch of the Palico as he jumps into the air. I then added in lots of lightning and dust effects, along with giant clouds of wind following along with his jump, just to show how much force and energy went into it. Once I finished the line art and extra details of this page, I began working on the next one. This page starts up with a close-up shot of the helmet of the Palico. We can see his one eye peeking out from the darkness, as he was only going to use one of his eyes to take down Arkfeld. This was his way of showing respect and honor for his hunter since he had lost an eye in the process of this battle. I really did my best to capture the detail of both his helmet and his eye for this panel, and I think I did a pretty good job at it. I then added in a harsh dark gradient over top of it to mimic shading, and then removed the areas that I wanted light to be shown in and to peer through. I knew that the next panel was going to be a shot of Arkfeld roaring out as the Palico slices his back for a final blow, but I wasn't really sure how to capture the attack I was going for just yet, so to start I began with the sketch of the front-facing view of Arkfeld as he doesn't notice that the Palico is about to strike him from behind. I then added in some extra shading over top of him, along with his mouth open to show that he was indeed roaring. I then tried like 4 or 5 different ways to show the motion of a blade swinging down at him, but struggled to find one that fit in properly. I was able to find inspiration from things like Demon Slayer, since they use swords quite a lot and clearly know how to depict it. I drew in this like wave of air and movement slashing over the Arkfeld, and then added in a silhouette of the Palico dashing by it to show that he was the one that let off the swing. I honestly think this page turned out pretty cool, and of course there are things I could have done better, but this was my first time trying something like this, and I'm okay with its lack of expertise. I cleaned up this page with better line art, and then added in the finishing details like shading and lighting, and was done with it. The next page was going to be a really detailed shot of the aftermath of that fatal blow that was dealt to Arkfeld. I started by sketching in the floor, along with the details of the background that this scene would take place in. I then began sketching in the body of the Arkfeld as it hit the floor and laid still. Once I was pleased with the shape I made, I started by rendering the line art over top of it, to really make it stand out against the details I was going to be adding in additionally afterwards. I wanted to make the body of Arkfeld darken to show its lack of life as it laid on the ground, and have the contrasting details of the Palico I was going to add on top of it to be bright and visible to resemble light. I began sketching in the Palico and tried a couple different poses, but eventually landed on the one you'll see here. It was a shot of him standing on top of the Arkfeld with his sword placed into his back. A classic nod to the game itself where you can harvest materials after defeating a monster, and also the whole knight slaying the dragon sort of thing that has been around for centuries. After capturing the scene, it was time to wrap things up with the final page of the manga. This was going to be a scene of the hunter and the Palico reuniting after the battle. The first shot was going to be the hunter smiling with his beaten up face and damaged glasses. He was still able to feel grateful and excited to see what his Palico was capable of. He was obviously really relieved to see that he lived another day, but was even more relieved to know that both him and his Palico came out of that battle alive. Second panel was a shot of the hunter holding the Palico closely as they reunite and hug one another. They're both happy to see each other and will stay by each other's sides until the very end. The last panel is a shot of the moon as it gently falls across the night sky. A very calm way to end things off. Anyways, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. The full link to the manga is going to be linked down below in the description, and if you guys did enjoy this video, please make sure to check out my socials like Twitter and Patreon, where I not only post early content, but I'm also really active in the community on there. If you want to see more videos of mine, they'll be on screen here, along with the option to subscribe, which you definitely should do. Anyways, thanks again, and have a good one.